Okay. O great Emu, the 5 elders are at your service. Have you decided upon another light to be erased from history? Simply state the name you wish stricken. Okay. That line may hold so much meaning for us. This video might be one of the craziest videos I've made to date, and I've made some crazy videos, to be honest. I think that's what's fun with my channel sometimes. I'll start off saying something so out of pocket, but by the end of the video, through all of the connections, it starts sounding so plausible, and sometimes the things happen in the actual story. So anyways, this video will contain current manga content up to chapter 1047. So if you're not caught up, get caught up. Please join this community. It's a lot of fun. That being said, today we're going to be talking about the power around Sun God Nika, and a concept that I think might be pivotal to not just Sun God Nika, but maybe all of Devil Fruits or One Piece as a whole. It's an interesting thing because how does the power of the sun possibly relate to rubber? It seems so random, but I might have found the connection. For those of you who follow my channel, this is the start of the shadows theory. So if you're new to my channel, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the ParVision. Alright, let's start off this video with this quote from Toki. You are the moon unaware of the dawn. May your purpose be fulfilled and cast 9 shadows on the night woven of 20 years, and you shall know the brilliance of the dawn. It's a little cryptic, but I wonder who is the moon, who is the dawn, and who are the 9 shadows? It should be the Akazaya 9, right? But technically Kanjuro betrayed them, so it wouldn't really be fitting if they were the 9 shadows. I guess Shinobu or Izo could substitute Kanjuro, but yeah, just a side thought to keep in mind. This line contains a lot of the buzzwords that I want to focus on in this video. So let's talk about Sun God Nika, and probably the most important aspect of Luffy's Gear 5, which is that he transformed into a pure white form. To be clear, we still haven't gotten confirmation of this, but I think when Luffy is transformed into Gear 5, his whole body is turned pure white, so that means his skin too. Now, there might be a lot of explanations for this. A plausible explanation is that might actually be a mixture of the various colors of haki, and you were probably like, well, when you mix all the colors, you'd get black, right? Well, so that's where we kind of have to get a little scientific. If you were painting and added all the colors together, you would get black, or you'd get like a brown. But that's because the paint is not emitting light, and in a way is subtractive. So what happens is you add more colors into the mix, and they continue to subtract more light from being reflected and end up absorbing all of the light and putting out a more blackish color, though creating true black is really difficult. But if you were emitting light, then the colors become additive. So if you mixed all the colors of light together, you would get white. That's how TVs work. When you see white on a TV, each pixel is a mixture of red, green, and blue. You know, RGB. And a quick side note, now that we're seeing Zoro with green haki, Sanji with blue flames, and Luffy with red haki, it seems like an interesting setup for this same concept. But anyways, with Luffy's Gear 5, we see this white light, which makes sense because as I mentioned in my previous videos, the sun is actually a white light. We see it as a yellow-orange hue because our atmosphere reflects and absorbs part of the light spectrum. But on its own, our sun is white, again like Luffy. And I wanted to clarify this because an important separation to be made is with the Sulong, which are known to draw their power from the full moon and are dubbed the Moon Lions. They gain a white form, and Luffy does as well. And it might seem similar, but considering Luffy is called Sun God Nika, I think his white form should be associated with the sun rather than the moon. But that being said, another important understanding is that the moon works in synergy with the sun. Though I think the lore of it will be separated in One Piece, but the reality is that the moon is kind of a dark floating space rock and only looks white because it's reflecting a small percentage of light from the sun. And by now you can probably tell that my first script for this channel was a deep dive on sun and moon lore in One Piece, but I never released it. I went with the elemental haki video instead. Okay, so why did I just talk about all of this? Well, so I think Luffy's white transformation is supposed to imitate that of the sun, and that he is actually emitting light. And another quick thought that I had was that if the Sulong get their power from looking to the full moon, and the moon gets its power from the sun, but you can't really stare into the sun because it's too bright, then I wonder what would happen if the Minx stared at Luffy in Gear 5. Luffy might be able to trigger Sulong transformations by being in Sun God Nika form. And so this is possibly the first and most important thing about Sun God Nika that elevates this fruit from just a rubber fruit. And now I do have an explanation for a reason Luffy is white in Gear 5 that relates to rubber, but I say it's a tier 3 or 4 video in terms of priority. But maybe I can talk about it on stream. Actually, yeah, that's a good idea. Ask me about it in my next stream. But focusing on this again, it's odd that we are calling Luffy Sun God Nika and we don't really know why. I mean, Nico is known as the warrior of liberation, but liberating who exactly? We know slaves and imprisoned people, but we don't know the context. And then on top of that, we're just told that Nika's body has rubber properties, but it's a human model devil fruit. So then it makes it sound like humans are capable of becoming rubbery too. And I actually have a theory that supports that, and I talk about it in my chopper video, but also just the concept of semi-Kikon just feels like it's involved here, especially if we're talking about gods. But so if the white coloration of Luffy were related to light and it ties into why is Sun God Nika, then maybe it's possible that the rubbery properties are also related to light too. There might be an explanation that connects light and Luffy that makes all of what we're seeing in Gear 5 make sense. Even the craziest stuff like fire and lightning immunity, the giant form, and even converting other things into something that acts like rubber. Now I want to clarify that I'm not against the idea that Luffy just has Toon Force. It might be that this is exactly what Oda wants Luffy's powers to resemble, and there's ample evidence of it. What I'm providing is a possible alternative perspective or a way Luffy's power can connect to Toon Force in an interesting way. So what's really important about all of this is actually how we were shown Nika. Our initial introduction of Nika and then when Luffy transformed into Nika, how are we shown it? It looked like this, and this, and this, and one more panel. Do you see a pattern? The pattern is shadows. I think shadows could be incredibly important for Luffy's powers as Sun God Nika. It might even make sense that all of Luffy's powers stem from shadow control. Wait, what? Yeah, shadow control. I'll elaborate on this, but think about it. Where do shadows come from? I've talked about the sun a lot in my Sanji video because Oda essentially connected the swirl of Sanji's eyebrows to devil fruits and to the rotation of the sun, earth, and moon. When you think about what the sun does for the earth and moon, it's not an understatement to say it provides literally everything from life to stability. The sun is instrumental to weather, energy, tides, nature, anything really, you name it. I'm unsure if all of the physics apply in the One Piece world, but as I mentioned before, the moon is white because it reflects under 12% of the total light that the sun hits the moon with. Similarly, the Earth also does not intake all of the solar radiation. About 26% of light is reflected by the atmosphere, 18% of the light is absorbed by the ozone, leaving 56% that hits the Earth. But due to various reflective factors like snow and clouds, about 48% of the solar radiation is then absorbed by land and water on our Earth. Which, by the way, what do snow and clouds have in common? They're both generally white. But so the sun does all of that, but one more thing is that without the sun, would we have any shadows? Without a source of light, would your shadow even exist? So in a sense, the sun creates shadows. One could even say that the sun is the ruler of shadows. When the sun moves and changes, so do the shadows. So then Sun God Nika was also the ruler of shadows? Oh wait, we already have that. Moria. His shadow fruit dubs him the ruler of shadows, not a shadow human. But this brings us to that interesting point. Moria interacts with shadows and can manipulate them, but if we're being honest, he does not create shadows. His power is actually contingent on the sunrise or a source of light, which is why his domain is within a fog away from the sun. So this might be a hint at what Sun God Nika was liberating. If Sun God Nika had the power to create or change shadows, then maybe Sun God Nika was liberating people without shadows, just like Luffy was doing as the Warrior of Hope in Thriller Bark. I mean, if you don't believe me, take the testimony of the people who had their shadows stolen and then returned after Luffy defeated Moria and Oars. They are absolutely hysterical with tears and cries of happiness and uncontrollable smiles that they can finally stand in sunlight and also look at the rising sun and see themselves in a mirror, which I'll get back to in a second. Then there was Lola's crew that said, "I can feel the morning sun. No need to fear the dawn anymore." And another interesting line is that they don't have to hide in a dark forest ever again. Ironically, the Sun God Nika liberated them, unbeknownst to them at least. And now let's get to that mirror part because it's really interesting. Because through reverse logic, Oda created a system where if your shadow was stolen from you, then you could not see yourself in a mirror. Why is that? Well, a mirror reflects light. And without a shadow, that would imply that you have no light to be reflected, which is why you would not show up in the mirror. So stealing people's shadows would more accurately be comparable to stealing someone's light, which might be an important reason that Luffy as Sun God Nika could give people light. And you know why all of this sounds familiar? Remember how this video started? Let's go back to that Gorosei quote. "O great Imu, the 5 elders are at your service. Have you decided upon another light to be erased from history? Simply state the name." So like I said, this wording sounds even crazier when you put it in the context of Moria's power. When you hear about a light being erased from history, there's two things I think about. The first is what happens when a shadowless person is in the sunlight. It literally looks like they are being erased. As Robin puts it, our existence was on the verge of disappearing when the morning sun shined on us, but the instant our shadows were returned, we were resurrected. When Zoro, Sanji, and Robin returned, Robin said, "For an instant, I felt like I was climbing to heaven." So is this what the Gorosei meant by erasing a light from history? Because if you stole someone's shadow, then you could essentially delete them or force them to live in the shadows of history, never able to appear in the sunlight again. Also, just real quick, remember that last line I said. It's really important. Replay it if you need to. It'll be important later. But okay, even if you deleted a light in this way, it's not like they would be erased like the Void Century history. As the great Dr. Hiroluk said, a man does not die when they are shot or diseased, it's when they are forgotten. And we know of one power that has a really interesting role in One Piece, and that's Sugar's Hobby fruit. And I've talked about it lightly in previous videos, but we'll talk about it more later. But her fruit allows people to be erased from history. On top of that, she has eternal youth. Her power is so sus. I imagine if you combine Moria and Sugar's powers, you could create an extremely oppressive environment. And interestingly enough, Luffy as Sun God Nika liberated the shadowless, and Usopp as God Usopp liberated the forgotten. And real quick, here's a wild hypothetical. Between Moria and Sugar, maybe that's how devil fruits were created. Another user of Sugar's fruit could just make fruits out of people, and Moria could stuff shadows of those same people in something else. There's definitely something interesting there, and I'll talk more about it in a different video, but I had to get that thought out. I'm not too tied to it, but at the end of the day, with the whole erasing light line from the Gorosei, maybe that's why they wanted Moria's fruit randomly after Marineford. But what's interesting is that we have a feeling of what erasing light might refer to between Moria and Sugar, and the Gorosei possess neither of those powers, and yet they are claiming to be able to do this just by Eam stating a name, as if this is Death Note or something. It makes you wonder then how they plan on achieving this, and it doesn't seem like Eam has this power, otherwise the Gorosei wouldn't need to be requesting the information from Eam. We've come this far now, and we still haven't covered how any of this relates to Sun God Nika or Luffy or powers or anything. There's so much to go over. So let's start with some more of the basics of shadows. So keep in mind, all of what I'm about to say is established in the One Piece verse. I ask this question often to tease people. If I ask you how many souls the average person in the One Piece world has, what would your answer be? I'm talking about, like random fodder, not someone with a devil fruit or something, or someone affected by Big Mom. The answer would be 1, right? No, it would actually be 2, which was probably obvious by the way I asked the question. But yeah, every person from birth starts out with 2 souls, one for their body, and the second soul is the one that belongs to their shadow. As Brook explains it, the shadow is another soul that follows its master's moves. Under normal circumstances, that soul is supposed to follow you from birth to death. And just a side note, when Moria transfers a shadow into a zombie, it retains the personality and battle abilities of the shadow's original owner. And it can contain memories unless Moria decides to wipe them. But okay, so to reiterate, with this logic and what we've talked about, a person cannot exist in the sun without their shadow, but a person can exist without their shadow as long as they stay away from sunlight and stay in the shadows. On the flip side, a shadow cannot exist without the original body it was born and essentially tethered to, and that shadow has a separate soul that apparently contains memories, personality, and battle abilities. The soul aspect is really interesting because we are learning more about the power of souls in general. I mean, Big Mom's soul can create natural disaster level homies. Zoan devil fruits apparently have wills, which kind of implies some kind of soul thing. We already know because of Zoro about the breath of all things, which also implies that all things are alive. And then we have examples of swords like Enma that apparently contain a strong enough personality to impose a test on its user. And we know that people with strong soul power kind of equate to strong willpower, and especially when it comes to Conquerors. Big Mom's Conqueror soul power is so strong that her Vivre card can scare her homies. So it's really interesting to think about what possibilities lie in shadow souls, and maybe the shadow of a Conqueror. Or is there an example of a shadow with an overwhelmingly strong will? So why does it matter though if a shadow gains a will? Oh, does it matter? It really matters. See, the natural law is that your shadow follows you. It matches your every movement and all of your shapes and curves and whatever you have. But Moria proved to us that this concept can work in reverse through something called shadow revolution. So if we go back to Thriller Bark real quick, you guys remember Oars? Moria took Luffy's shadow and put it into Oars. There's so much to dissect in this process, but so Oars gained Luffy's personality and battle abilities, and coupled with Oars' base stats plus being immune to pain as a zombie, that made Oars a menace. But one thing about Oars was that he was not stretchy. He was a normal ancient giant, as normal as that can be, but because he had Luffy's battle ability, he would be trying to do Gomu Gomu attacks that would just end up being normal punches or kicks or headbutts. That was until Moria started using Shadow Revolution, where Moria would alter Oars' shadow so that the body would match the shadow. By abusing the natural law of shadows, this allowed Oars to mimic Luffy's rubbery movements. And the quote that gets said in response to seeing this is, "It's not that Oars became a rubber man, but he's forced to mimic a rubbery shadow." And then to further give us an example, Moria says this ability is more dangerous than if he were made of rubber, and showed us that he could turn Oars into a ball if he rolled up his shadow. And boom, that's where we tie back to our recent chapters. Luffy literally turned Kaido into a giant ball, and a few more inexplicable things that don't really make too much sense. But it could if we applied this Shadow Revolution logic to what Luffy's doing. We know that as far as awakenings go, we have seen paramecias affect their environment, and Kid's a little bit of an outlier in that he was able to assign a magnetic field to Big Mom, but I wouldn't put it on par with Luffy's ability right now that not only turns the environment to rubber, but also his opponents, and especially Kaido of all people. Also, a significant difference between Luffy and the paramecia awakenings that actually makes him closer to Kid right now. It seems that to activate Luffy's awakening on his environment, he has to touch it or be in direct contact with whatever he wants to turn to rubber. So far, he hasn't shown the ability to control things like Doflamingo and Katakuri could with their awakenings. And so anyways, what we do see out of this Gear 5 form is that when Luffy is in direct contact with Kaido is when he's able to rubberize him. Now he could be changing Kaido into rubber and back with every touch, which would be interesting, but if we use the context of shadows and Luffy being a sun god that can probably affect shadows, then it might be that Luffy is doing all of this to Kaido because of shadows, in the sense that he might be unintentionally manipulating Kaido's shadow using some light power that he's unaware of. That would be a way to explain how Kaido is stretching despite not having a body made of rubber. And there's a specific scene, well, two now, where Kaido smashes Luffy into the ground, and the image we get is the silhouette or shadow of the ground being bent around Luffy. And essentially, whenever Luffy touches anything, it bends. And I was thinking maybe as Sun God, because he is pure white and possibly reflecting or emitting light, he might be morphing the shadows of everything he comes in contact with, or making the shadows move with how he desires, because again, the sun creates and changes shadows. Like I was thinking, maybe that is how Luffy managed to get the giant form and now the giant fist. By being higher up in the sky, his shadow would naturally get larger, making it easier for Luffy to manifest a giant form. Kind of like shadow puppets. The closer your hand is to the light source and further from the background you're projecting on, the larger your hand's shadow will appear. And a lot of us look at that filler scene where Luffy became a giant as possible foreshadow, but this scene at the end of Skypiea where Luffy's shadow was giant on the clouds kind of reminded me of 1047, where if Luffy were Gear 5, he might have been able to become that size back then. So in other words, it's kind of like Luffy and his shadow are like liberated and both can affect each other freely. So then you're probably like, okay, so by this logic, is Luffy not rubber then? And even I was like, no, he's still rubber. But then the next question would be, okay, then how is he immune to lightning if he isn't rubber? And that's where I came to a really unique and funny answer. Well, to raise that, Luffy isn't just immune to lightning. He has shown time and time again that he is immune to fire too, and rubber isn't exactly immune to fire. And now that he is Sun God Nika, the only tie into the sun would be Red Hawk, Red Rock, and the possible fire immunity, all of which he got before Gear 5. So with the Shadows theory, would Luffy still be immune to lightning and fire? And the crazy answer is, I think yes. I remember asking this on stream. But does lightning have a shadow? And in general, fire wouldn't really have a shadow either. So my thought goes to, if the attack doesn't have a shadow, it won't really affect Luffy. Because to truly damage Luffy, it might be that you have to hit his shadow as well as his main body, which sounds crazy for a lot of reasons, but I'll get back to this point in a little bit. So yeah, I know this is wild, but just hang on for a second. See, another reason why I went on this whole Sun God Nika power deep dive was because of a concept I brought up in a previous video, that there will be at least one other god that will play an opposing role to Nika. And I say at least one because there's probably going to be more, because at a minimum, the celestial dragons seem to have originated from some godly figure, and it doesn't make sense for that figure to be Nika. So yeah, and a lot of people were saying Moon God, but Moon God didn't sit right with me either, because the moon works with the sun, and if anything, the moon draws its power from the sun. So to me, a Moon God wouldn't be the proper opposite of a Sun God. There might still be a Moon God, but not opposing Luffy in that way. So when you really get down to it, the true opposite of a sun or star is a black hole. In the life cycle of a star, the eventual end leads to a black dwarf or a black hole. And interestingly, our sun could turn into a white dwarf. Is that what Luffy is right now? But yeah, why is a black hole the opposite? Well, because a sun puts out massive energy in the form of light and heat, and a black hole does the complete opposite and sucks in everything and nothing can escape. So there is a small asterisk on what I just said about black holes, but I doubt Oda would talk about it because it gets into white hole theory, and we don't need to get into that either. But so anyways, with this logic, that'd naturally make us think that Blackbeard and his darkness power is going to be the natural enemy of Luffy, even as Sun God Nika. It might even sound and feel like the situation Enel had with Luffy, where he felt Luffy was his natural enemy. Luffy might get that reverse Uno when facing Blackbeard, and Blackbeard literally has a move called Black Hole and another one called Liberation, which just kind of is a blatant reference to Sun God Nika. Also, I don't want to get into the Blackbeard stuff too deeply in this video, but Blackbeard said his fruit chose him, making it primed to be a mythical Zoan contender, possibly. But so the thing I want to focus on here is that through Blackbeard's Yami Yami no Mi, he can somehow nullify devil fruit powers. The way Blackbeard was describing his powers, it was very similar to that of a black hole in that he stated that his darkness was gravity, and it could suck in everything. Punches, blades, bullets, fire, or lightning. Interesting, by the way, that he specifically said fire and lightning. But so Blackbeard goes on to say he can also pull in the actual body of a devil fruit user, which was said in the context of his confrontation with Ace, who is a Logia user. And then he goes on to suck in Ace and hold him, and I don't believe he is using any armament haki here because Blackbeard said he hit him with a real punch, and we know that Ace has been hit by haki punches before by Whitebeard, and so it's not like he hasn't been punched before. So somehow Blackbeard is negating Ace's devil fruit power, and according to Whitebeard, he is grabbing the actual body of the devil fruit. The wording of this reminded me of how Robin described armament haki when Luffy grabbed Caesar back on Punk Hazard. She says, armament haki only gives you the ability to interact with the body of the Logia. And unlike the sea or the energy that comes from Sea Prism Stone, it doesn't actually sap the opponent's ability to use his powers. So that's really important. So let's separate this out. We know of 3 ways to affect Devil Fruit users outside of water: Sea Stone, Armament Haki, and Blackbeard's Darkness. So the thing about Sea Stone is that it weakens the user just from contact. Armament Haki does not automatically weaken people off contact, nor does it prevent you from using your powers. Whereas Blackbeard's Darkness prevents the user from using their ability like Sea Stone, but doesn't weaken you. At least from Ace, we don't get the feeling that he felt weakened as if you were touching Sea Stone. I wanted to point that out because there is a possibility that Blackbeard's power is related to the depths of the ocean. Even one of his moves translates to dark waters, and since he can negate devil fruit powers, it's not hard to think that there has to be some kind of connection. But I would say if Blackbeard's power truly contained the power of the ocean, then it should also weaken devil fruit users when they're attacked. So then it seems like Armament Haki and Blackbeard's power has a closer connection because they both grab the true body of the Devil Fruit user. So an important thing with Armament Haki is that if I grab Luffy with Armament Haki, it's not like his powers would be negated. He would still be rubber. So I could squeeze him with Armament Haki and that could hurt him, but let's just imagine I pick him up and slam him down and his face hits the ground. Luffy should not really be hurt by that because he's still rubber and wouldn't get hurt off the hockey-less ground. And that's where it's super interesting. When we flash back to Impel Down, Blackbeard did the same move to Luffy and grabbed Luffy, but he didn't punch Luffy. He slammed Luffy into the ground and Luffy was in pain and bleeding. That makes no sense unless Blackbeard's power completely negated Luffy's rubbery body, which, by the way, not even the ocean could do to Luffy. This demonstrates, by the way, that Blackbeard can negate properties of Nika. This scene proves that Blackbeard truly took away Luffy's Devil Fruit powers entirely, and Luffy wasn't weakened like he would have been if he were exposed to Sea Stone. So then the question is how? And the answer might lie in shadows, or some mixture of light and shadows. So let's revisit the concept of shadow revolution. If your shadow has to follow you as a natural law, what happens if the shadow is locked or stuck? That would imply the main body would be too. Given that Blackbeard's power is of darkness, there's two ways I'm understanding it. Well, there's more, but either Blackbeard is absorbing light, which prevents the shadow from forming and changing, or Blackbeard is using his darkness to essentially chain up the shadow, preventing the Devil Fruit user from using their fruit. And the third and more expansive thought, but also related to this, is that Devil Fruits themselves might activate their power through light or shadows, which has a lot of implications if we're going that route. But with any of these explanations, it would make sense that Blackbeard could negate the powers if the powers are somehow based in light and shadows, and further reiterate the emphasis and importance of Luffy's Sun God Nika powers. But if you thought that's where this crazy video ends, you'd be wrong. I think Blackbeard's power is specific for so many reasons, besides him just thematically being evil or the embodiment of darkness, or as he puts it, because he is the holder of the most dangerous power in the world. Now on top of that, he has Whitebeard's Gura Gura no Mi, the power that can destroy the world. And at the end of the video, I'll leave you with a crazy realization I had that will lead into the next video related to this subject. So if we follow the concept that in order to move or activate powers, your shadow would have to follow too. So if we apply this to Zoan Devil Fruits, let's say, then that means in order to create a transformation, your shadow would need to transform also, which is an interesting logic line because yeah, technically if you morph the shadow into a specific shape, the body would have to follow. Then the thought came to mind that the Gorosei said that the Zoan fruits all have wills of their own. So maybe the way that the Zoan fruits work are by interacting with the shadows of a person. We know that no devil fruit affects the lineage factor of the user, yet they're able to allow the body to do some crazy things. Then naturally though, you're probably like, well, this all falls apart for Paramecias and Logias. And while I admit to go through every Paramecia and figure out if this theory fits would be crazy, it might also be necessary, but I think for the sake of continuing, the overall umbrella way to explain it would be that through specific light and shadow manipulation, all of these powers could be facilitated. But this brings up Logia powers, which I think is important. Regardless of how some of these powers work, I think that they have to do with light rather than shadows, but not ignoring the fact that both concepts are related. But something I was thinking about was when I said Luffy might be immune to attacks without shadows, or basically light-based attacks, a huge hole in that idea was Kizaru. Being the light human, that wouldn't make sense for Luffy to insta-negate an admiral. But the thing here is, Kizaru's not absolved from the shadow law. None of the Logias are. For them to be human or living or exist, they have to have a shadow at all times. Otherwise, they would disappear. This means even in their intangible state, their true body has to have a shadow. And that is where I think armament haki and shadows connect. When talking about both, they used very similar terminology in that Blackbeard's darkness and armament haki allowed the user to grab onto the body of a devil fruit user. So it might be that armament haki works by allowing the user to hit their opponent's soul and also their shadow. That might be where all of this connects. If armament haki is understood as some ability that allows you to coat yourself in soul power, maybe naturally the shadow also gets coated. Like if you think about it, if I wanted to stop a Logia user and I didn't have haki, then the best way would be to restrain their shadow. They wouldn't be able to move if their shadow isn't moving. One way or another, it feels like shadows might connect to haki. Which makes even more sense now after what Kaido said about how Haki transcends all abilities. Given what was discussed also, it makes sense that if someone like Blackbeard exists who can negate all powers, we are probably going to get a Devil Fruitless battle in the future, where Haki will be the bread and butter of the battle then. I imagine that's where higher levels of Haki and possibly elemental Haki will come into play, and now maybe shadows too. When you think about it, maybe this is the basis for Black Blades also. But so, getting back to the shadow stuff, now we gotta talk about the next crazy part. So if we are saying that armament Haki and darkness can counter devil fruit powers by essentially targeting the shadow of the user, then we need to ask ourselves, what's the logic of why devil fruit users lose power being submerged in water? If you want a deeper dive on this concept, go check out my devil fruit boats float video. But I think an explanation in the context of lights and shadows is that water scatters light, thus making a shadow difficult to form in the first place. That might explain why depth of submersion matters so much in weakening a devil fruit user, because the deeper you go, the degree of light pollution would increase, which gets interesting because Pyroblowin and Sea Stone aren't actually water, but rather give off the energy of the ocean, yet still without scattering light can affect devil fruit users. But then to go back to Thriller Bark, salt alone was able to disrupt a devil fruit power and allowed the Straw Hats to purify the zombies and free the shadows. So we do have an example of how salt or sea stone are able to essentially purge foreign shadows. So maybe devil fruits on their own are kind of like foreign shadows that get disrupted by the power of the ocean. If that's the case, I wonder what the history of those shadows are and why the ocean rejects them. Which brings us to the next crazy part. Repeating, this is not headcanon. We know that people contain multiple souls, one in their body and one in their shadow. Saying a shadow has a soul is a very important thing, given Haki and soul relevance in general. I mean, it's probably not a coincidence that one of the Yonko has the soul fruit, and a Straw Hat member is Soul King. But anyways, if a shadow has a soul, that means it might have its own Haki. That means shadows have a breath and can be cut by Zoro. Or they might have a voice and it could be heard. And maybe shadows can invoke their own wills. I'm bringing this up for two main reasons. The first one is we have inanimate objects like the Going Merry that can create a soul projection, inanimate objects like Enma that can invoke a test on its user, and inanimate objects like a gun and sword that can eat devil fruits. If that's the case, then why can't a shadow do all of this? I'll have an extra video that expands this idea because I said all of that and I can't help but think that the Grim Reaper that Zoro saw might also be related to all of this. You know how the Going Merry manifested the Clawbotterman when it was nearing the end of its life? This Grim Reaper could be the equivalent of the Clawbotterman for Zoro, and it could be a projection either created by his own shadow by him, or it could be, and this would be going back to the Black Blade idea, that this projection of the Grim Reaper could be the shadow of Enma. But so getting back to this video, if all of these non-soul objects can do these things, then it would be fair to say that shadows could be fairly powerful, but they are subservient to the body, which is where Sun God Nika's liberation comes into play. So wait, pause. Can a shadow eat a devil fruit? Or similarly, but wilder, what if when someone eats a devil fruit, the power they get is retained in their shadow? Which is why the shadow aspect is so important. But so I think the second part can be debunked pretty quickly in that when Luffy's shadow was taken in Thriller Bark, he was still able to stretch. But you'll understand why I asked this question in a second, despite knowing the answer. So going back to, can a shadow consume a devil fruit? Well, we might have an example of this in One Piece, and you probably already guessed it. If you haven't, it's the man who has 2 devil fruit powers, Blackbeard. So I will do a deeper dive on Blackbeard in the next video, and you'll know why by the end of this video, but I was thinking about Blackbeard's darkness fruit, and how it is a Logia, but not a Logia, and I pointed that out in the previous video. Now considering Luffy had a similar circumstance where he had an outlier power and ended up being a sun god, it could very well be that Blackbeard is in the same situation where rather than being a Logia, he is a mythical Zoan with darkness powers, which is why he can't go intangible, and again, I'll talk more about the various possibilities in another video. But another thing I was thinking was, what if Blackbeard had some sort of weird interaction with his shadows, even before eating a devil fruit? There is the multiple soul theory around Blackbeard, and I even talked about it in my double layered eye video. Like when Marco says that Blackbeard has a weird body, from our knowledge, it doesn't appear that Blackbeard is any special race, so maybe the weird body could be referring to something Blackbeard can do with his shadow. Maybe when Luffy and Zoro met Blackbeard, the other thing they sensed was Blackbeard's shadow, which might have had an overwhelmingly powerful enough presence to be sensed by pre-time skip Luffy and Zoro. So getting back to Blackbeard's Logia powers, I was thinking, what if it was a true Logia and there is no discrepancy in intangibility? And the reason why would be that his shadow ate the darkness fruit. And the small example of this is that when Blackbeard goes out to put out the fire that Ace threw at him, his darkness wraps around Blackbeard from behind him, which is just an interesting demonstration of his powers. Like, if he was a Logia, then why wouldn't it just appear around the fire? Why does it have to come from behind him? But okay, even without the part where Blackbeard's shadow eats the darkness fruit, let's talk about the scene where Blackbeard took Whitebeard's fruit. All of this is literally shrouded in mystery. So Whitebeard was already dead, confirmed by many by this point, and Blackbeard's crew covers Whitebeard and lets Blackbeard go inside alone. Maybe Blackbeard was holding an apple or something and just wanted to hide the fact that the fruit transferred that way. But I feel like if we get a future reveal of what actually happened, it's not going to be something that we found out about on Punk Hazard. Also, considering Blackbeard has a darkness Logia, couldn't he have enshrouded them in darkness on his own? So maybe there was an actual function for this blanket. So I know there's that cannibalism theory where eating a devil fruit user is a way to transfer the power, but it doesn't seem like Blackbeard mutilated Whitebeard in any way because it was stated afterwards that Whitebeard looked the same as before he was covered. So I was thinking maybe it had something to do with Whitebeard's shadow, or even the shadow of the devil fruit. Maybe by containing the light, Blackbeard used his darkness fruit somehow by absorbing Whitebeard's shadow or the devil fruit's shadow, which again is madness. Now we're talking about shadow transferring? Well, at least this theory would explain how normally a person could only tolerate one devil fruit power, but if they somehow have a shadow with a strong enough will, they could possibly have two fruits, which would imply that Blackbeard, Moria, and Luffy, due to their abilities relating to light and shadows and strange bodies in general, can maybe stretch that logic by having more than one fruit. I don't know how many fruit is the max, but right now if it's just a fruit per soul, then maybe it's two fruits max. And so we finally come to the second thing I want to bring up when it comes to a shadow invoking their will, and tying it to the possibility of a strong-willed shadow. Honestly, this could be a video on its own with how crazy this is. Maybe I'll make a separate video fleshing this out. But okay, take a deep breath. I'm not dead set on this, but what if Rox D. Zebek was alive, or more accurately, not dead? According to Sengoku's retelling of God Valley, which by the way he was not there for, Garp was, and it wouldn't be the first time Garp lied about something massive, Ace being something he withheld from everybody, but according to Sengoku, Rox D. Zebek is no longer alive to speak of the history. But what's weird about that is when Big Mom brings it up in chapter 999, she says Rox fell into ruin. Why didn't she just say he died? Also, an interesting clue was that when Kaido was talking about how Haki transcends all, he referred to only Roger. I know Rox technically was wiped from history and didn't accomplish anything in the grand scheme of things, but we don't know if Rox was a devil fruit user. And that's where I had a really interesting connection. You know how in Eni's lobby, Jabra said if a devil fruit user came close to another devil fruit, the devils would jump out and fight and cause the user's body to explode. Bluno in response was saying that's bogus. We already know the conditions of the powers. And Bluno goes on to say, what you're talking about is an example of someone who ate two. His body fractured until there was nothing left of it and he died. Then Rob Lucci says, greedy fools destroy themselves. I couldn't help but think we've made it this far, all the way up to God fruits in One Piece, and we still don't know anyone who actually knows of this person who ate two devil fruits. The way Rob Lucci says greedy fools destroy themselves makes it sound like it wasn't some random person or science experiment, and just made me think, wasn't Zebek considered greedy? What if he was the person who ate two devil fruits and his body was fractured until there was nothing left of it? To everyone else, it might have looked like he died. But what if his shadow remained? I'm not sure how or why this would be relevant, but you're like, why did you include this tinfoil hat theory inside this shadow theory? I know I usually separate out these things, but Doflamingo made me, I swear. I was minding my own business on TikTok when I saw this. Doflamingo's speech from chapter 801. In the anime, there was a line that was translated slightly different, and it kind of slapped me in the face when I heard it. Here it goes. Stand up once you hear the line. I know you'll know it when you hear it. So it goes, who's ruling all the seas? Is it one of the 4 emperors of the sea? Or the 7 warlords who cleverly live out in the seas? Or the brats from the worst generation? No. The Navy, the military forces of justice, is conquering the seas. There are some strong members who we must keep an eye on in the Revolutionary Army, the ally of the people. The family of D have been hiding in the shadow of history. When and where are they going to show themselves? Who's going to side with who? Who's going to betray who? Tell the celestial dragons in the holy land of Merijois that they'll be dragged down. It's been 25 years since Gold Roger fully explored the whole Grand Line. His arch-enemy Whitebeard didn't sit on the throne, but just stood in front of it and took the reins. What about now? The number of pirates is ballooning. And there's one seat that's totally empty. You know what I mean, don't you? It will start. The biggest struggle for supremacy ever in the history of pirates. So, did you hear the line that I was talking about? The people of D have been hiding in the shadows of history. In the manga, it says smoldered away beneath the currents of history, which would mean like slowly burning with no smoke, but also underwater, which also implies again that they're not gone, just hidden. But the way the anime translated it again just hit me because there's so many ways to think about it. I mean, the literal understanding would be that the D clan has been hiding in the darkness, not gone, just oppressed in a sense. But I can't help but think maybe there's a deeper meaning. Like, are the D clan passing on their will through shadows? Do they have some sort of shadow control? Again, does that relate to Blackbeard, as he is a D clan member? Do all D clans have this ability? And another question, are the Devil Fruits shadow related to the D clan? And are the D clan the people who are inside of the Devil Fruits? And then ironically, there's this line that Kaido said that caught my eye. When the Red Scabbards attack Kaido, he responds to them saying, all of Orochi's hallucinations that no one believed have come to pass. The rumors of figures at Odin's Castle, Punk Hazard, Dressrosa, the lost island of Zoe, oddly enough, you have been hiding in the shadow cast by the very man I've had my eye on, Straw Hat. Which I want to add this tinfoil theory really quickly because I already mentioned how there is a possibility that the Straw Hat itself contains a soul or will, demonstrated by chapter 100. That being said, Luffy has always been in the shadow of his Straw Hat. When Luffy has his Ash Ketchum moment, it's usually depicted with the Straw Hat shadow covering his face. But so to come full circle, I would say there's definitely a thematic around shadows that seems to be way more important than we think, especially when you tie it into the concept of light in One Piece, from the Gorosei saying that they want to erase a light to how Sun God Nika's appearance seems to be. I think there's a possibility where Devil Fruits and the Will of D and even the Void Sentry could all be connected using shadows. All the way back in Enies Lobby, Blue Note claimed the Grand Line scholars already understood how Devil Fruits convey their powers. Again, that's a very interesting statement, as scholars are very different than doctors like Dr. Vegapunk. But nonetheless, Oda has said a certain professor will appear in the near future and explain the complex nature of Devil Fruits. There's still so much to unravel here with Haki, but also Smile Fruits. Why do they have that negative side effect if it's just light and shadow manipulation at work? How does Imu play into this? What are the ancient weapons for? And are there other gods? And so right there is where I'm going to pause and say the last crazy thing. Well, last major crazy thing in this video that actually will set you up for the next video. Before I continue, please remember to like, share, and subscribe and spread the vision, the ParVision. Alright, to really come full circle, let me repeat this other line that I said at the start of the video. You are the moon, unaware of the dawn. May your purpose be fulfilled and cast 9 shadows on the night woven of 20 years, and you shall know the brilliance of the dawn. I don't think we've had the 9 shadows scene yet in Onigashima, but I imagine when the dawn breaks, we might get that scene with 9 shadows. Maybe it is the scabbards, but if Luffy is Sun God Nika, he might represent the dawn, and excluding him, there'd be 9 crewmates. This is just an interesting take though. It would be a really cool parallel to Enies Lobby, where one of the most iconic scenes are the Straw Hats lined up, and the same sentiment where Robin declares that she wants to live, that would be reflected in the samurai who are resolved to die but should want to live. So then that hit me in the face too. I'm just getting hit in the face all the time by One Piece. All throughout the series, highlighted especially in Thriller Bark and Wano, there was a huge emphasis on freedom at the break of dawn, being able to make it to the next day even when the sun rises, and that's even in the song Bink Sake. There's so many complex meanings there, but not just in that arc, but in every arc I'm sure there would be some reference to the dawn and Luffy, which brings us to the concept of the dawn of the world. According to Pedro and Cat Viper, the Minks and Kozuki have been waiting for the dawn of the world for centuries. In some capacities, so have the fishmen. But that aside, Pedro even sacrificed himself, saying he believed Luffy and his friends would guide the world to the new dawn. Yamato also says this of Momo, that Momo needs to survive to guide the world to the dawn. So far, it feels like Luffy being Sun God Nika might be the actual dawn, or the biggest piece towards the dawn. When you think about this, especially the way the Minks spoke of it, it seems like they've been waiting for the new dawn ever since the Void Century. Meaning, if we were to name the eras, there is the time before the Void Century, there is the Void Century, then there's the time after the Void Century, and everyone seems to be waiting for the time after the Void Century to end, and it would end with the era of a new dawn. So then this had me thinking, if dawn referred to Sun God Nika, and we know Nika awakened 800 years ago during the Void Century, but seemingly was defeated or oppressed or in hiding, and the thing about eras is they're kind of usually named after someone or something even in One Piece. Gold Roger started the golden age of pirates. And so this next part might be the greatest foreshadow in One Piece history. See, in chapter 504, Doflamingo said something that just blew my mind. He said slave trading is getting old. This is the era of the smile. I think he was right, because slave trading was something that was abolished even after the Void Century but returned, and so it seems like slavery is the mark of an old era, and Nika means smile or grin, right? So the new dawn might be the era of Nika, or in other words, the era of the smile. Which is kind of wild when you think about it. But wait, you know what that would imply, right? That would imply that Void Century was also named after someone or something. So that's when my mind went racing, because if Nika is the dawn and he awakened 800 years ago, probably through Joy Boy, then maybe the antithesis to Nika was Void, meaning the other god that opposes Nika might be named Void. Since Nika supposedly lost back then, Void probably won, thus dubbing it the Void Century. The name of the other god could have been in our face this whole time. It could have been something like, and hear me out, I haven't stuck to any name yet, there's a lot of iterations, but considering Nika might have been a derivative from the Greek goddess of victory, Nike, maybe the antithesis would also have Greek roots, also tying in the presence of the ancient weapons. Like if Shirahoshi was a devil fruit, wouldn't her fruit be the mythical Zoan human fruit model Poseidon? So maybe the name of this other god or other fruit would be the Chaos God Void. But Chaos never really came up before. It could be the Dark God Void, and Void being the actual name of the god, or another option could maybe be Darkness God or Void God Uranus. Yes, the last ancient weapon. I have 3 different outcomes for saying that, and I still have to think about this part. But to kind of explain, well, earlier I said chaos because in Greek, chaos means emptiness or void. It can mean space or infinite darkness. So chaos in modern mythology refers to the primordial state before creation, strictly combining 2 separate notions of primordial waters or primordial darkness, from which a new order emerges, and in in this case, that would refer to the dawn of the new world, wouldn't it? And interestingly, Phersites of Syros interpreted chaos as water. So maybe Imu is the chaos god Imu because Imu reverses Umi, which means ocean. And it might be possible that the Void Century is named after Imu. That is a possibility. And because this is a theory, another idea is that chaos or void god Uranus could make sense because Uranus is supposed to be the Greek deity that rules the sky, or rather is the embodiment of the sky. And to clarify, I'm kind of thinking, and I'm on the fence about this, but I'm pretty sure Blackbeard's darkness fruit has to relate here somewhere. Also, darkness might not necessarily be what we think. Imu might represent chaos, and the two notions colliding would be Sun God Nika and Void God Uranus. But also, you know this image that has been passed around showing the parallel from chapter 1046? Well, this image is depicting Chaos Kampf. This image is supposed to represent the struggle against chaos. It's showing a cultural hero that is fighting a chaos monster that is typically depicted as a dragon or serpent. And it's crazy because it definitely looks like Oda used this as a reference for this panel. And so maybe that tells us that Kaido's awakening is related to chaos also. Maybe he's a chaos monster. You can probably see that there's still some details that I need to clear up before this is a theory that can be made, which is why I'm going to do a deep dive on the Void Century next. There's so many ways this can go that all sound really cool and awesome, but so why is Uranus tied to this void god thing? Well, Uranus was supposed to be the Greek deity that rules the sky, or rather is the embodiment of the sky, right? Also, I want to point out that the naming scheme of the trio ancient weapons are odd. Uranus would be the odd one out in terms of mythology, which I'll dive deeper later, but so sky. Why is the sky important? Well, let's take another closer look at the name Void Century, specifically at Void. So Void Century has been written like this in kanji, which, apologies for my pronunciation, would be Kuhaku no Hyaku Nen, and we translate it to the Void Century. So Kuhaku would specifically be what is translated to void. It could also mean blank or space or empty. Do you see a parallel to the Greek word chaos yet? Okay, cool. Now it gets crazier. Now I ran this by Artur, Library of Ohara, to make sure I wasn't crazy, but so this is the kanji for kuhaku, or void. And you know Oda likes to make a play on words, and I was thinking, given the word means blank or space, what would happen if you put a space in the kanji? And that's when I realized what each of these kanji means separately. So if you separate the symbols for kuhaku, you get the symbol for Sora and the symbol for Shiro. If you watched anime as long as I have, you don't even need Google Translate for that. Yes, the symbols for void in Void Century are sky and white, or white sky, which is crazy for so many reasons. So Artur clarified to me that the symbol for Sora could mean sky, but it could also mean void or empty, because the sky is generally empty. So instead of white sky, it could be white void, which is still crazy because you could kind of read this as the white sky century rather than the void century. But even more so, when you think of something being blank, is it dark or is it white? I mean, this gets into a huge philosophical question of what nothingness truly is. Darkness seems to be the flip side of light, but without light, there would be no darkness. So would it be pitch black or blank white without light? Our perceptions of this can't really understand this concept, but there are three things I will close this main part of the video with. Shadows could be pivotal in all or parts of the One Piece world. I think there is a world where, as Sun God Nika, who should have the power of light, he could be altering shadows and thus creating the insane display of power we've been seeing ever since Gear 5 debuted. It could literally explain everything that we've seen, even the crazy Toon Force-like powers, and again would finally make the name Sun God Nika make sense and still justify the rubbery properties. And now the second thing, this new understanding of literally everything might explain the uniqueness of how we were introduced to Blackbeard. I'll dive deeper on that, but what's interesting is this choice of this panel specifically, where Blackbeard says people's dreams don't ever end. I don't think there has ever been a panel that was similar to this, where Oda chose to put these characters over a completely blank, kuhaku, or void page. Was Oda foreshadowing us the nature of their fight that we'll see, where Luffy is now pure white and Blackbeard might also have pure white powers or create some kind of void? And that takes me to my third point, and it might be that true darkness is also white. When you think about it, if the entire sky was white, that would mean all the light outside, including the sunlight, would be reflected out, and the world underneath that is left in the shadows would be shrouded in true darkness, and who knows what that could cause. But yeah, okay, I'm done. I'm done with the shadows video. Kind of, not really. Like, I could keep going, but I will save the rest of this Void Sentry talk for my Void Sentry video. I think I have a few major clues as to what happened in the Void Sentry, because I think I found a few panels where Oda actually showed us the Void Sentry, besides these panels. And now because of that and this white sky thing, everything just makes so much sense. And I'm sorry that this video took so long to get out, but these videos are harder to make. If you truly enjoyed this video, please share this video to as many people as you can. Also, if you want to support me in making more videos like this, please consider joining on as a Patreon or joining my YouTube community or subscribing on Twitch. Also check out my referral links. Also a reminder to stay until the end of the video because I'll give a little teaser about that Zoro video. But before I get to that, I just want to thank everyone in the community for supporting me and continuing to watch me. This video is just the tip of the iceberg. If you've been on my streams, then you know I got infinite One Piece content in my bag. It's honestly like chaos. I'm having so much fun sharing my thoughts and ideas, and you truly don't know how awesome it is for me to have this outlet in my life. I got so much more planned, and I hope you guys stay on this journey with me. All that being said, speaking about people who we hope to stay on our journey, we should talk about Zoro. Zoro has been out of commission uncharacteristically for nearly this entire year so far. So I won't go super far into the details, but if you want to hear more, I talked a little bit about this on stream with Hidden Island. Links towards the discussion will be in the description box. So the hint or teaser is that there's one thing we talked about in this video that has put Zoro out of commission, like we are seeing on Onigashima, and that might connect to some of the shadow stuff we were talking about and possibly the gag around Zoro getting lost. But anyways, that'll be what we'll talk about next time. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next ParVision.